Hello everyone. Tonight we're going through every single boss in Elden Ring. Not their movesets, not damage windows or cheese strategies. Their stories. Who they were before you found them. What broke them, elevated them, or left them stranded in that specific ruin, in that specific state of grief or rage or devotion. Because here is the thing about Elden Ring that separates it from almost every other game. Every boss was someone before they were a boss. Godrick was a desperate man who grafted the limbs of others onto himself because borrowed strength felt better than none at all. Radahn learned an entire school of gravitational magic just so his horse could still carry him. Malenia carries a god inside her that she never asked for and has never once been defeated in her entire life. Morgott defended a throne he was never allowed to sit on, in a city that threw him into its sewers, with a devotion that never wavered. And the Elden Beast at the very end is not a monster, it is a living law. The physical form of the Golden Order itself, doing exactly what it was made to do. Every boss in this game has a story like that, and every story is worth knowing. Some of them will change how you see fights you have already won. Some of them will make you feel something unexpected about a creature that killed you more times than you want to admit. Tonight we are going through all of them, grouped by what they are rather than the order you fight them. The demigods, the ancient ones, the servants of the Golden Order, the corrupted, the forgotten, the nightmares, and everything the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC added on top of an already extraordinary collection. Before we go any further, find your position. Whatever you're lying on, however you're resting, let your body settle into it fully. Tonight is a long one. We're going through every boss in Elden Ring and there is a lot of ground to cover, so get as comfortable as you can and let the outside world do whatever it wants to do without you. And before the first boss, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I read every single one. It means more than you know. Every boss, every story, every reason they are where you find them. Let us begin. The demigods of Elden Ring are the children and grandchildren of Queen Marika, and every single one of them is a tragedy. Not a tragedy in the sense of a story that ends badly, though most of them do end badly. A tragedy in the deeper sense of a story about people who are given extraordinary gifts and extraordinary burdens simultaneously, who were shaped by forces they did not choose, who made decisions that made sense from where they were standing, even when those decisions were catastrophic from every other angle. The demigod bosses are the heart of Elden Ring's narrative, and understanding them fully means understanding not just what they are when you fight them, but who they were before the shattering broke the world and scattered the great runes among them. Godrick the Grafted is the first major demigod most players encounter, and the cruelty of his position in the story is that he is also the weakest. Not weak in absolute terms, he is formidable enough to kill unprepared players many times over, but weak relative to his cousins, weak in the way that matters most to someone like Godrick. Weak in terms of divine inheritance and bloodline power, and the specific hierarchy that the Golden Order civilization used to measure the worth of those born into it. He is the most distant descendant of Marika among the demigods, the least golden, the most desperate to be more than he is. The grafting is the expression of that desperation given horrifying physical form. Godrick grafts the limbs of other creatures and other people onto his body because he believes that accumulating the physical power of others can compensate for what his bloodline did not give him. The throne room of Stormvale Castle, his seat of power, is surrounded by the evidence of this belief, writhing masses of flesh and limb that were once people incorporated into the castle walls themselves. This is not evil in any simple sense, it is the specific pathology of someone who has been told their whole life that they are insufficient, and who has decided that the solution is to become more, regardless of what becoming more requires. The detail that elevates Godrick from grotesque antagonist to genuine tragedy is his claim to have trained under Godfrey himself, the first Elden Lord and the greatest warrior of the Golden Order's early age. Whether this is true or a fabrication, whether Godrick actually spent time in the presence of that legendary figure, or whether he simply claims that lineage because it is the closest available connection to genuine greatness, is something the game leaves deliberately ambiguous, but the claim itself tells you everything you need to know about him. He is a man defined by what he is not, by the greatness that was around him and did not transfer to him, by the inheritance that his bloodline promised and did not fully deliver. Everything he does, every arm he grafts and every power he borrows, is an attempt to close the gap between what the Golden Order told him he should be and what he actually is. When he grafts a dragon's head onto his severed arm, when he grafts a dragon's head onto his severed arm in the second phase of his boss fight, there is a moment, brief and almost easy to miss, where he roars with something that might be triumph. He has added a dragon to himself. He is more than he was a moment ago. The fact that he is still losing, that the borrowed power of an ancient draconic lineage is still not enough to close the gap, is the final statement of his story. Stormveil Castle itself, the architectural expression of Godrick's rule, is worth examining as a lore object. It is a grand structure, genuinely impressive in its scale and its design, a castle built to communicate power and permanence. But look more closely, and the maintenance has slipped. The walls are crumbling in places. The defences that should be organised are chaotic. The castle of a desperate man looks like a castle of a desperate man if you know what to look for, and the game gives you every opportunity to look. The soldiers who serve Godrick serve him with varying degrees of conviction, some truly loyal and some simply present, because leaving a castle in the lands between is not the kind of decision most people make lightly. The pumpkin-head soldiers, those armoured warriors with gourd-shaped helmets, are among the most visually distinctive of Godrick's forces, and carry in their design the specific quality of an aesthetic that is trying too hard, that is, performing impressiveness rather than simply possessing it. Everything about Stormveil is performing. In the second phase of his boss fight, there is a moment, brief and almost easy to miss, where he roars with something that might be triumph. He has added a dragon to himself. He is more than he was a moment ago. The fact that he is still losing, that the borrowed power of an ancient draconic lineage is still not enough to close the gap, is the final statement of his story. Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon, is not a demigod by birth. She's a human woman, the head of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, one of the most brilliant sorcerers of her age, who became connected to the demigod lineage through her marriage to Radahn, and whose great rune was not inherited but given. When you reach her in the Grand Library, you find her in the wreckage of that library, surrounded by the students who have sworn themselves to her care, singing a lullaby and cradling a piece of amber. She is not raging, she's not scheming. She is broken in the specific way that people break when they lose something they organise their entire identity around. Radahn left. He was called back to Marika, recalled to his divine duty and his other self, and Rennala was left with 3 children and a piece of amber that happened to contain a shard of the Elden Ring, and a grief so complete that it collapsed everything around it. The students who attend her in the library are not simply loyal, they are the last warm things in her world. They love her because she loved them when she was capable of loving, and they stay with her now that she is barely present, because leaving would mean acknowledging that the person who made this place worth being in is no longer fully here. Her great rune is called the Great Rune of the Unborn. Her great rune is called the Great Rune of the Unborn, and it allows her to grant rebirths, to give people the chance to begin again as something different from what they are. In game terms, this means respects. In lore terms, it is the mercy she offers that she cannot offer herself. She can give anyone a new beginning. She cannot give herself one. The students who serve her in the ruined library have their own tragedy, a community of people who gave their academic futures to a woman who was brilliant and kind and who is now barely present, tending to her the way you tend to someone you love who has become unreachable, maintaining the routines and the proximity because breaking them would mean acknowledging something too large to acknowledge. The specific way she holds the amber, clutching it against herself as she sits among the books and the singing and the gentle motion of her students around her, is one of the most human images in a game full of divine politics and cosmic horror. She has one thing left. She is holding it. Anyone who has held on to the last piece of something they loved understands exactly what that posture means without needing it explained, and it allows her to grant rebirths, to give people the chance to begin again as something different from what they are. In game terms, this means respects. In lore terms, it is the mercy she offers that she cannot offer herself. She can give anyone a new beginning. She cannot give herself one. The person she would need to be different from is the woman who loved Radahn, and she cannot stop being that woman, and so she sits in her ruined library and offers to others the one gift that would matter most to her and that she cannot receive. When you fight her, the battle takes place in a dreamlike space outside the library, a golden night sky populated by the echoes of her memories and her power. It is beautiful and deeply sad. You're not fighting a monster. You're fighting someone's grief. Starscourge Radahn is the boss that most players have the strongest feelings about, and the facts about him are some of the most quietly devastating in the entire game. He was by most accounts the strongest of the demigods in raw combat capability, a warrior of such extraordinary power that he learned gravitational magic specifically to be able to keep the stars in place. This is not metaphor. Radahn held the stars in their positions for centuries because his sister Ranni's fate was tied to the movement of a specific star, and he refused to allow that fate to proceed. He learned an entire school of magic, became one of its greatest practitioners, and used that mastery to resist the movement of celestial bodies, all because he loved his mother Renala and resented Ranni for the choices she made. The detail about his horse Leonard is the one that breaks people. Radahn grew so powerful, so physically massive, that no ordinary horse could carry his weight. Rather than accept this and move to a different form of transportation, rather than simply get a larger horse or travel on foot, Radahn learned gravity magic specifically so that he could make himself lighter and Leonard could still carry him. He did not want to give up his horse. He learned to bend the laws of physics rather than say goodbye to something he loved. By the time you encounter him in Caelid, the rot has taken his mind. Malenia's scarlet bloom, that catastrophic moment when the two most powerful demigods clashed, and Malenia released everything she'd been containing, infected Radahn and destroyed him from the inside out. His body remains massive and powerful and devastating in combat. The person who chose Leonard, who held the stars for centuries, who learned gravity magic out of stubbornness and love, is gone. What remains fights you in the ruins of Caelid, and his soldiers, who have camped on those red sands ever since the Battle of Aeonia, refuse to leave and refuse to kill him. because they loved him and are waiting for someone worthy to give him the honourable end he deserves. The Radahn Festival. The in-game event, the Radahn Festival. The in-game event that allows you to summon multiple NPC allies for his fight is not a celebration in any ordinary sense. It is his soldiers' way of giving him what they can no longer give him themselves. A worthy opponent, a real fight, something that honours what he was even in the state he has been reduced to. The allied summons you can call into the fight. Figures like Blade and Alexander and various others who have made their way to Caelid for this specific purpose are people who understood something about Radahn that the game communicates through their presence. They came, they showed up, they are here because a great person deserves a great end, and the people who loved greatness in Radahn are willing to risk themselves in service of providing that end. The scale of the Radahn Festival fight, the number of people involved, the size of the arena, the chaos of the encounter, is the game's way of communicating the scale of what Radahn was before the Rot took him. A person this important requires this many witnesses. That allows you to summon multiple NPC allies for his fight is not a celebration in any ordinary sense. It is his soldiers' way of giving him what they can no longer give him themselves, a worthy opponent. Lord of Blasphemy made a choice that is unlike any other demigod's choice, and that the game presents with genuine philosophical seriousness rather than simple condemnation. He fed himself to a god-devouring serpent, deliberately and with full awareness of what he was doing. He merged with it, becoming something that was simultaneously Rykard and not Rykard, human and serpent, demigod and ancient creature, and he did it because he believed the Erdtree and the Golden Order were a lie, and that the only way to resist an immortal institution was to become something equally immortal through different means. His philosophy, expressed through the volcano manor that serves as his base of operations, is one of consumption. He invites his followers to eat the flesh of gods, to take the divine into themselves rather than worshipping it from below. He sees this as the ultimate blasphemy against the Golden Order, and also as the ultimate truth about how power actually works. The Golden Order claims that divine power flows from the Erdtree to those it favours. Rykard claims that divine power can be taken, consumed, made your own through the act of devouring rather than through the act of worshipping. There is something genuinely admirable about Rykard's rebellion. There is something genuinely admirable about Rykard's rebellion if you can see past the horror of what he became. He identified real problems with the Golden Order. He refused to simply accept the framework he was born into. He found a form of resistance that was as radical as the institution he was resisting. The fact that his method was monstrous does not make his diagnosis wrong. His followers at Volcano Manor are not simple villains. They are people who are failed by the Golden Order in various ways, and who found in Rykard's philosophy something that felt like truth. The assassination targets that Volcano Manor sends you after are not randomly chosen. Each of them represents someone who is pursuing the Elden Ring through means that threaten whatever Rykard is trying to build. The Manor's willingness to kill other Tarnished tells you something about how completely Rykard has separated himself from any solidarity with his original kind. He's not interested in the Tarnished project. He is interested in his own project. Consumption of the divine rather than service to it. The serpent god that he has merged with carries its own ancient mythology, connecting Rykard's blasphemy to something older than the Golden Order's specific theology. If you can see past the horror of what he became, he identified real problems with the Golden Order. He refused to simply accept the framework he was born into. He found a form of resistance that was as radical as the institution he was resisting. The fact that his method was monstrous does not make his diagnosis wrong. His followers at Volcano Manor are not simple villains. They are people who were failed by the Golden Order in various ways and who found in Rakard's philosophy something that felt like truth. The game does not ask you to agree with them, it does ask you to understand them. Morgott the Omen King is perhaps the most tragic of all the demigods, and his tragedy is unique among them because it is entirely internal. He was born an omen, a child bearing the marks of ancient divine curse or blessing, horns and talons that the Golden Order considered abominations. Omens are cast into the sewers beneath Leyndell, literally discarded by the society built by their own divine lineage. Morgott was born a demigod and thrown into a sewer because of what his body looked like, and he loves the Golden Order. This is the thing about Morgott that is almost impossible to sit with comfortably. He is the most devoted champion of the Erdtree among all the demigods. He conceals his omen nature, calling himself Morgott when he disguises himself, hunting those who would challenge the divine order, spending his existence defending a society that despises him. When you fight him as Morgott in Leyndell, after already defeating his Morgott disguise, his words carry a weight that is hard to shake. He calls the tarnished fools. He speaks with contempt for those who reach for the Elden Ring. And then he fights with everything he has to defend a throne he was never allowed to sit on, in a city that cast him into its sewers before he could walk. Why? Why does someone defend an institution? Why? Why does someone defend an institution that has treated them this way? The game never gives Morgott a simple answer to this question, because there is no simple answer. He was shaped by the Golden Order before he could question it. He has no other identity available to him, and perhaps, somewhere underneath the devotion, there is the hope that if he is devoted enough, loyal enough, useful enough, the institution will eventually accept him. That hope is never fulfilled, but it is never entirely extinguished either. The specific form his devotion takes is worth examining. He does not simply guard Leyndell. He hunts those who would challenge the Golden Order, travelling beyond the capital in his Morgott disguise to intercept potential threats before they even reach the city. He is proactive in his service in a way that goes beyond what duty strictly requires. This excess of devotion, the service that goes beyond the obligation, is often the mark of someone who is trying to earn something through the service that the service itself cannot actually provide. He cannot earn acceptance through loyalty. The Golden Order's rejection of omens is categorical, not a policy that exceptional service can modify. But he keeps trying anyway. That has treated them this way? The game never gives Morgott a simple answer to this question because there is no simple answer. He was shaped by the Golden Order before he could question it. He has no other identity available to him. And perhaps, somewhere underneath the devotion, there is the hope that if he is devoted enough, loyal enough, useful enough, the institution will eventually accept him. That hope is never fulfilled. But it is never entirely extinguished either. Mog, Lord of Blood, is Morgott's twin brother, and their divergent paths represent one of the most pointed contrasts in the game. Both were omens. Both were cast into the sewers. Where Morgott chose loyalty to a system that rejected him, Mog chose a different patron entirely. He received the favour of the formless mother, the outer god of blood, and in her blessing found the acceptance and power the Golden Order had denied him. He built his own kingdom in the depths, the Mogwyn dynasty, a blood-soaked realm dedicated to his outer god, and he kidnapped Miquella in an attempt to use the demigod's divine power to elevate himself further. The tragedy of Morg is not that he chose wrong, The tragedy is that he and Morgott started from exactly the same place, experienced exactly the same rejection, and ended up at completely opposite destinations. Mog chose rebellion and found a patron who would have him. Morgott chose devotion and served an institution that never fully accepted him. Neither path led anywhere good, but the gap between where they started and where they ended illuminates something true and uncomfortable about how people respond to rejection by the systems that are supposed to sustain them. Malenia, Blade of Miquella, the severed goddess of Rot, is the demigod who has most fully become something beyond what she was born as. She was cursed with Scarlet Rot from the moment of her birth, the mark of an outer god's influence on a child who had no say in the matter. She spent her entire life fighting the rot that lived inside her, developing a combat mastery built around her prosthetic limbs and her ability to heal through aggression, fighting in a style that reflects someone who has had to adapt to a body that was trying to destroy her from the inside. She has never been defeated. This is stated plainly in the game's lore, and it is not hyperbole. Every fight she has fought, she has won. The Battle of Aeonia against Radahn was the closest thing to a loss she's ever experienced, and she survived it. She released the Scarlet Bloom, the full expression of the rot she'd been containing her entire life, and Caelid was destroyed. The bloom was not a weapon she chose to use. It was what happened when someone who had spent their entire existence containing something finally reached the limit of containment. She survived. Radahn's mind was destroyed, and Malenia came to the Erdtree, her brother's abandoned sanctuary, to protect it in his absence, because it was the last thing Miquella left behind and she could not protect him. When you fight her, she heals from every hit she lands on you, even through your guard. This is not simply a mechanical challenge, it is a lore fact. Malenia heals through aggression because aggression is how she has survived everything. She is not fighting you with hatred. She is fighting you the only way she has ever known how to fight anything. With everything she has. With the full expression of a lifetime of adapting to a body that contains a god she never wanted. Her second phase, when the Scarlet Rot blooms around her and she becomes something even more terrifying, is the game showing you what Malenia looks like when she stops containing herself. When the barrier between the person and the god inside her comes down, she is beautiful and terrible and grieving in a way that combat cannot express, but that the environment around her does. The rot blooming into flowers, destruction wearing the face of growth. The specific detail that she heals from every hit she lands on you, even through your guard, is the most discussed mechanical fact about the Malenia fight, and also the most lore precise. Malenia's entire combat philosophy is built around the principle that aggression is survival. She does not have the option of playing defensively. She never has. A defensive approach to a body that is slowly being consumed by a god inside it is not a strategy, it is a delay. What she learned, over a lifetime of fighting in a body that wanted to destroy her, was that the only viable response to her condition is to commit completely, to attack so thoroughly and so precisely that the attack itself becomes the defense. The healing through aggression is not a supernatural ability she was given. It is the mechanical expression of a philosophy she was forced to develop by the specific nature of her existence. Malenia's location in the Erdtree, the tree that Miquella grew as a sanctuary for the cursed and the cast out, tells you something about her relationship to her brother and to the project he left behind. She did not have to come here. She chose to protect this place. A woman who has never lost, who could have gone anywhere in the lands between, and commanded anything she wanted through sheer force, chose to come to her brother's abandoned garden and stand guard over it. Not because anyone asked her to. Not because there was any strategic advantage to be gained. Because Michaela is gone, and the Erdtree is what he left, and she loves him. And this is the only form of love available to her now. She is guarding a memory with everything she has, and she becomes something even more terrifying. Is the game showing you what Malenia looks like when she stops containing herself, when the barrier between the person and the god inside her comes down? She is beautiful and terrible and grieving in a way that combat cannot express, but that the environment around her does. The rot blooming into flowers, destruction wearing the face of growth. The ancient things of the lands between are not simply old. They are of a different order of existence, belonging to a time before the current cosmological framework was established, before the greater will's influence organized reality into the specific hierarchy that the Golden Order maintains. Encountering them is not simply fighting powerful enemies, it is meeting the world as it was before the world became what it is now. And every ancient boss carries in their design and their lore a specific quality of loss, the loss of a world that was replaced rather than ended, that persists in fragments and ruins, and the specific dignity of very old things continuing to exist past the civilization that was built on top of them. Before the Erdtree rose and the Golden Order established its dominance, the lands between was governed by different forces. Ancient things, creatures and beings that predate the current cosmological order by spans of time that make the Golden Order's entire history seem recent. The ancient bosses of Elden Ring are encounters with what came before, with the specific quality of presence that belongs to something so old that the passage of centuries has become irrelevant to it. They are not simply powerful enemies. They are windows into a world that existed before the world you are walking through, and understanding them means understanding what the lands between lost when the Erdtree rose to dominance. Dragon Lord Placidusax is the oldest boss in the game, and one of the most extraordinary encounters in the entire Soulsborne catalogue. He is found in Farum Azula, that collection of ruins floating in an eternal storm outside the flow of time, accessible only through a specific ritual of lying down among ancient bones in a circle that functions as a kind of invitation. This is already telling you something important. Placidusax does not announce himself. He does not patrol or guard or threaten. He waits, in a space outside time, for something that has not come in longer than anyone can measure. He was the Elden Lord of a world that predated the current one. Not Elden Lord in the sense that the game uses the title for Godfrey or for the Tarnished, but Elden Lord in the sense that he was the chosen representative of a divine power that existed before the greater will established its dominance. He had two heads. Both faces carry an expression that players consistently describe as profoundly sad, and the reason for that sadness is encoded in the lore with a specificity that is genuinely heartbreaking. One of his heads represents a dragon who is simply gone, not dead. Gone. The god that Placidusax served abandoned this world and never returned, and Placidusax has been waiting in Farum Azula, in the storm that does not age, for that absent god to come back. For how long? The game does not give a precise number, because a precise number would somehow make it less comprehensible, rather than more. Long enough that the world he was Elden Lord of no longer exists. Long enough that the power structures he served have been replaced so completely that most people in the current age have never heard of them. Long enough that the waiting has become the entirety of his existence. Rather than simply a period of his life, he is still waiting. When you fight him, you are not fighting something hostile. You are an interruption in a vigil that has no end. The fight against Placidusax requires you to lie down in a specific spot among bones arranged in a circle to perform an act of ritual that functions as an invitation into a space that is not ordinarily accessible. This invitation mechanic is itself a lore statement. Placidusax does not come to you, you go to him. You reach into the space outside time where he waits, and you make yourself present there, and he responds to that presence not with welcome, but with combat. Because combat is what an ancient Elden Lord responds to when something enters the space of their vigil. He has been waiting for something. You are not what he's been waiting for, but you are there, and so he fights you with a full expression of what a pre-Golden Order Elden Lord is, which is magnificent and terrible and will kill most players multiple times before they understand what they're dealing with. The ancient dragons of Fara Mazula are not simply powerful animals, they are a civilization, or the remnants of one, with their own culture and history and relationship to the divine that predates the Golden Order entirely. Lanciax and Fortisax, the ancient dragons encountered in the game, were both deeply connected to Godwyn the Golden, and their presence in the story adds a dimension to Godwyn's tragedy that most players miss entirely. Lanciax was worshipped by the Gelmir cavalry, a warrior culture that maintained the old draconic faith in defiance of the Golden Order's dominance. She is found in the Altus Plateau, repeatedly performing a ritual that suggests she is searching for something or waiting for something, interrupted each time by the world's changes. Her connection to the pre-Erdtree Order is evident in every detail of her design and her location. Fortisax is encountered in the deep-root depths, in a place that is intimately connected to Godwyn's death and its aftermath. He was Godwyn's companion, perhaps his closest companion, a dragon who formed a bond with the firstborn son of Marika that went beyond the typical relationship between humans and dragons. When Godwyn died his terrible death, his soul destroyed while his body persisted and merged with the Erdtree's roots, Fortisax remained. He descended into the roots alongside whatever remained of his friend, and has been fighting the death blight that infects the deepest roots ever since. A battle that has no clear end because what he is fighting is a fundamental corruption rather than an enemy that can be defeated. The fight against Fortisax is accessed through Fia's questline, in the deathbed dream that she enters to retrieve the curse mark of death. The arena is bathed in the specific golden light associated with Godwyn, and Fortisax himself attacks with that same golden lightning. He is not fighting you because he wants to. He is fighting you because you have entered a space that is sacred to him, a place of grief and vigil. And his attack is the attack of something that has been defending something precious for too long and cannot distinguish between new threats and old ones. The ancestor spirit and its variants, those enormous ghostly elk found in the underground areas and in specific sacred spaces throughout the lands between, are the spiritual representatives of the Crucible Age, of the time before the Erdtree when life was fluid and the boundaries between species were permeable. They are not simply large animals, they are the living memory of a different order, of a world where what Elden Ring calls crucible aspects were not aberrations but the natural expression of life's fundamental connectivity. Their presence underground is significant. The underground spaces of Elden Ring, the Siofra River and the Insel River and the deep-root depths are places where the Erdtree's dominance is less complete, where older things persist in the spaces below the Golden Order's architecture. The ancestor spirits in these spaces are not hiding. They simply belong to a world whose primary spaces are underground, to the places where the Crucible Age's nature is most present, and the Golden Order's influence is most attenuated. The Fire Giant is the last survivor of a people the Golden Order destroyed. The giants who once dominated the mountaintops were the worshippers of the fell god, whose flame represented a challenge to the Erdtree's dominance. Marika waged war against them, a war that the game's environmental evidence shows was comprehensive and devastating. The mountaintops of the giants are a graveyard of a civilization, their ruins scattered across snow that has been cold for longer than the Golden Order has existed. The Fire Giant was left alive deliberately. His legs were severed and he was chained to the Forge of the Giants, the great furnace where the flame his people worshipped is still contained. He has been chained there ever since for centuries or millennia, a prisoner forced to maintain the flame that represents his people's faith and their destruction simultaneously. When you encounter him, you are encountering something that has had an incomprehensible amount of time to develop its rage. He does not speak. He simply fights with everything that remains to him, which is considerable. His first phase, where he fights on the ground with his chains and his fists, and his second phase, where he tears off his own leg to expose the flame within, are not simply mechanical transitions. They are the expression of something that has been forced to survive past the point where survival has any meaning except as a form of continued suffering. The regal ancestor spirit is found in Nokron, the Eternal City, the underground civilization of the Nox people who are cast beneath the earth by the greater will for the sin of trying to create their own Elden Ring. It is a being of extraordinary beauty, an enormous elk wreathed in spirits and ancient light, and fighting it in the context of Nokron adds a dimension that makes the encounter more than a combat challenge. The Nox people built their city around this being. They maintained their connection to the Crucible Age, to the old order that the Erdtree replaced, through their relationship with the ancestor spirit and the spirits that follow it. Defeating it is, in some sense, defeating the last living connection between the Nox civilization and the world order they were punished for trying to create an alternative to. The Golden Order required servants. This is a fact that the game's narrative consistently returns to in different registers, the understanding that divine power does not maintain itself, and that the beings who maintain it pay a price for that maintenance that the Order itself never fully acknowledges. The servants of the Golden Order are the people and beings who gave the most to the institution, who bound themselves to its perpetuation most completely, and who received in exchange for that binding the specific kind of loss that comes from having organised your existence entirely around something larger than yourself. The Golden Order was not maintained by abstract divine power alone. It was maintained by specific beings who gave their existence to its service, who bound themselves to its perpetuation through bargains and devotions and transformations that cost them everything they were before the binding. The bosses who served the Golden Order most completely are among the most powerful in the game, and also among the most specifically tragic, because their power and their loss are directly connected. The more completely they served, the more completely they were consumed by the service. Malekith the Black Blade is perhaps the most intimate of the Golden Order's servants, and his intimacy with Marika is encoded in 2 words in his description. He is called her shadow and her puppy, and both of those words carry an enormous amount of information about the specific quality of his devotion. He is her shadow in the sense of the protective darkness that follows a person everywhere, in the sense of the part of herself that she kept hidden and dangerous, in the sense of something that is defined entirely by its relationship to another thing. He is her puppy in the sense of something loved and loving, devoted without condition, present without demand, the specific form of loyalty that asks for nothing except to be near the thing it loves. Malekith was entrusted with the rune of death, the principle of true and permanent mortality that Marika had removed from the Elden Ring and locked away. She removed it because she could not bear what it had done to Godwyn, because the existence of true death in the world meant that what happened to her firstborn son was possible. By locking destined death away, she was trying to ensure that nothing could suffer what Godwyn suffered. She gave it to Malekith to guard because there was no one she trusted more completely with the most dangerous thing she possessed. When you fight Malekith and defeat him, you do not simply defeat a boss. You release the rune of death back into the world. Every boss that becomes possible after that, every fog gate that opens as a consequence happens because you killed Mariketh's guardian and freed the principle of true mortality from its prison. The Erdtree, which had been sealed by golden thorns, becomes penetrable. You can enter it. The final sequence of the game becomes possible. Malekith's death is not simply a milestone. It is a cosmological event. Godfrey, first Elden Lord, and his golden shade Huaralu are the boss that most completely represents what the Golden Order was in its prime. Godfrey was the first human that Marika chose as her consort, the warrior who led the battles that expanded the Erdtree's dominion across the lands between. He is described as ferocious and loyal, a man of extraordinary martial capability who devoted his power entirely to the expansion of the Golden Order's civilization. He was, by every measure, exactly what the Golden Order needed in its early days. And then his grace was taken from him, not as punishment, but as purpose. Marika deliberately stripped Godfrey of his grace and sent him into exile beyond the lands between, with his warriors, telling him to wage war in the lands beyond and become the Tarnished. This is one of the most extraordinary facts in the game's lore. The first Elden Lord was made into the first Tarnished deliberately, by the god who loved him, as part of a plan whose full nature the game only partially reveals. Marika was preparing for something. She needed warriors who would be forged by exile and hardship, who would be shaped by centuries of fighting in lands where the Erdtree's grace did not reach. She needed the Tarnished. When Godfrey returns, when the Shattering calls him back and he comes as the ghost that challenges you in Leyndell, and then as his full human self after the Erdtree's thorns fall, he's not the same person who left. He is Huaralu, the name he bore before Marika elevated him, the berserker warrior from before the Golden Order claimed him. His second phase strips away Elden Lord and reveals what was underneath it, the man who existed before the title, before the grace, before everything the Golden Order made him. Fighting both phases of Godfrey is fighting both the public face of the Golden Order's greatest champion and the private self that the public face was always built on top of. The Huaralu phase is the most honest thing the game shows you about Godfrey, not his golden armour and his halberd and the formal posture of an Elden Lord. A berserker, bare-armed, grappling and throwing and fighting with the specific physicality of someone who learned combat in a world before civilization made it formal. The Golden Order elevated Godfrey. The elevation was real, and underneath it, always, was Huaralu, the man who existed before Marika found him, before the grace claimed him, before the title was given. Marika chose Huaralu. She elevated him into Godfrey. She then stripped the elevation away and sent him into exile so that the exile could forge the Tarnished. And now both the elevation and the man underneath it stand before you, making the argument that they were always both the same person, that what the Golden Order made was not a replacement for what was there before, but an addition to it. Radahn of the Golden Order is the second to last boss of the main game, and the revelation of the fight changes its nature retroactively. Radahn is Marika. They are the same being, two identities sharing one divine body, one red-haired and male and devoted to repairing the Elden Ring, one white-haired and female and the one who shattered it. The same being working against itself, trying simultaneously to destroy and repair the fundamental law of the lands between. When you fight Radahn, you are fighting Marika's other self, trying to stop you from reaching the Elden Ring. He attacks with holy power, with the Golden Order's most fundamental energies, with the tools of the institution he has dedicated himself to preserving. The red gold nails embedded in his body are his own work. He literally nailed himself to the Elden Ring, trying to fuse himself with it, trying to repair it through sheer force of divine will. It did not work. But the attempt is visible in his body when you fight him, the evidence of a being who could not stop trying to fix what the other part of himself had broken. The Elden Beast emerges from Radagon's body when you defeat him, and it is the most conceptually significant boss in the game. It is not a monster, it is a law. The greater will sent the Elden Beast to the lands between to carry the Elden Ring, and the Elden Beast is the Elden Ring's guardian not because it chose to be, but because it is constitutively connected to the ring. It cannot be separated from what it is protecting, because it and the thing it is protecting are the same kind of thing, both instruments of the greater will, both expressions of cosmic order given physical form. Fighting the Elden Beast is not fighting an enemy, it is fighting a system, a process, a thing that does what it does not out of malice or ambition or any motivation that a person might have, but because doing what it does is what it is. When it tries to kill you, it is not because it hates you, it is because you are a threat to the order it embodies, and responding to threats to the order is the automatic expression of what the Elden Beast is. You cannot reason with it, you cannot make peace with it. You can only fight it or submit to it. The specific beauty of the Elden Beast fight visually is the most pointed irony in the game. The final boss of Elden Ring is one of the most aesthetically stunning encounters in any game, golden and vast and swimming through a space that seems to contain the entire cosmos. And it is fighting you to enforce a system that the entire story of the game has been critiquing. The beauty is real, the system is real, and the game trusts you to hold both of those things simultaneously. The corruptions of the lands between are not all the same kind of corruption. Some are the result of contact with outer gods, whose principles are incompatible with human existence. Some are the result of the Golden Order's own systems failing in ways that produce damage rather than order. Some are simply the expression of ancient forces that the Golden Order never fully managed to suppress, coming through in the cracks of a civilization that has been pretending the cracks are not there. Understanding which kind of corruption you are dealing with changes what the encounter means and what it costs to resolve it. Not all of the powerful beings in the lands between became what they are through divine inheritance or cosmic service. Some were transformed by forces they encountered, changed by contact with outer gods or abyssal powers, or the specific corruption that the lands between's cosmological instability produces in those who are exposed to it without adequate protection. The corrupted bosses are the most viscerally disturbing encounters in the game, because they are the clearest expressions of what happens when the wrong kind of power touches a being that was not built to contain it. Astal, natural born of the void, is perhaps the most alien boss in the game, a creature that did not originate in the lands between at all, that arrived inside a meteor, a being from outside the cosmos whose very existence challenges the categories that the Golden Order uses to organize reality. 2 versions appear in the game, one in the Lake of Rot and one at the end of Ranni's questline, and their presence in the world is connected to the Nox people and to the specific cosmic catastrophe that created the Lake of Rot. Estelle is not corrupted in the sense of having been changed from something better. It is simply alien, operating according to principles that have nothing to do with the Golden Order, or the Crucible, or any of the frameworks that the Lands Between uses to make sense of existence. Its body resembles a crustacean assembled from stars. Its face is vast and insectoid. Its behaviour is driven by an alien logic that reads as madness from any human perspective. Fighting it is fighting something that is not hostile in any personal sense. It is simply doing what it does in a world where what it does is catastrophically incompatible with the world's continued existence in its current form. The Frenzy Flame Proscriber, also known as the Three Fingers Servant in the world, does not appear as a named boss, but is represented throughout the game by the various frenzied flame enemies and by the presence of the Three Fingers themselves in the Undercity beneath Lanedell. The frenzied flame is an outer god of dissolution, of the end of all separation, of the return of all individual things to an undifferentiated unity. Its corruption does not make its hosts more powerful in the conventional sense. It makes them expressions of the dissolution principle, carriers of a desire to end the distinctions that make individual existence possible. The various Crucible Knight bosses found throughout the game are not corrupted in any negative sense. They are survivors, beings who predate the Erdtree's dominance and who carry within their bodies the crucible aspects that the Golden Order has spent its existence trying to suppress. They bear tails and wings and aspects of ancient beasts incorporated into their armour because their armour is partially organic, partially the expression of what they are rather than simply what they are wearing. They are aggressive toward you not because of malice, but because they are the guardians of things that predate you, things that the current age does not fully understand or respect. The Crucible of Life, expressed through the Crucible Knight Siluria, who is found in the Deeproot Depths, is perhaps the most ancient of the Crucible Knights encountered in the game. She guards a space that is connected to the oldest history of the Lands Between, to the time before the Erdtree organised everything into the current hierarchy. Her presence there is not incidental. She belongs to the deep places, to the underground spaces where the Crucible Age persists most completely, in the same way that the ancestor spirits belong there. The ulcerated tree spirit bosses, those writhing masses of golden wood and root and flesh that guard various locations and are found both on the surface and underground, are among the most disturbing visual designs in the game and among the most lore-rich if you read them carefully. They are the bodies of those who attempted to offer themselves to the Erdtree's grace, but were not accepted, whose devotion was not rewarded, but whose connection to the Erdtree was strong enough that the Erdtree's energy continued to flow through them anyway, transforming them into something that is neither living nor dead, but a kind of animated corruption of the divine relationship they sought. They wanted to be taken into the Erdtree, they were not, and the grace that flows through them anyway has turned them into this. The scholarly tradition of the Lands Between has always existed in tension with the Golden Order's faith-based framework. Sorcery, in the mythology of Elden Ring, draws its power from the stars themselves, from glintstone, the crystallized material of cosmic light. This means that sorcerers are, at a fundamental level, working with material that predates and exists independently of the Erdtree's influence. The Golden Order tolerated sorcery because it was useful, and because the Academy provided the institutional framework to keep it controlled. But the tension between what sorcery implies, that cosmic power exists independently of the Golden Order's divine hierarchy, and what the Golden Order claims, that all power flows through the Erdtree, was never fully resolved. The Lands Between has a long tradition of scholarly pursuit, of the attempt to understand cosmic forces through study and experimentation, rather than through faith or combat. The bosses associated with this tradition are among the most intellectually complex in the game, because their stories are stories about knowledge and what it costs, about the specific danger of learning too much without the wisdom to know what to do with what you have learned. Rennala, in her capacity as Queen of the Full Moon, rather than as a grieving wife, represents this tradition at its heights. Before Radahn arrived, before everything that followed, she was the head of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, and one of the most celebrated sorcerers of her age. Her particular school of magic, the moon magic associated with the full moon, and the lunar energies it could focus and amplify, was a genuine contribution to the scholarship of her time. She studied the cosmos not through the lens of the Golden Order's faith, but through the lens of empirical investigation, seeking to understand how the stars and the moon affected the glintstone energies that sorcery worked with. Sellen, the Master Sorcerer encountered in Elden Ring's main quest and at the centre of one of the game's most complex quest lines, is the most complete embodiment of the scholarly tradition's dark side. She was expelled from the Academy for conducting research deemed heretical, research into the primeval currents of sorcery, into the oldest and most fundamental expressions of glintstone magic before the Academy systemized and restricted it. Her quest involves gathering the primal glintstone of ancient masters, the concentrated essence of sorcerers so old and so powerful that their consciousness has been preserved in crystalline form. The truth that emerges about Sellen across her questline involves her true identity and her relationship to the history of Raya Lucaria in ways that transform everything she has told you. She's not simply a talented exile. She's a student of something older than the Academy itself, something that the Academy's institutional framework was designed partly to contain. Her goal, to restore the primeval current and reconnect sorcery to its oldest and most fundamental expressions, is presented by the game with genuine ambiguity. Is she trying to liberate something beautiful, or unleash something dangerous? The game trusts you to decide. The Glintstone Dragon bosses, Smerag and Adula and their variants, are ancient dragons who have developed an affinity for glintstone magic, whose very bodies have become crystalline, and who can channel the cosmic energies of starlight through their breath. They represent the intersection of two of the Lands Between's oldest traditions, the pre-Erdtree dragon civilization, and the scholarly tradition of working with stellar materials. They're not simply powerful animals that happen to breathe magic instead of fire. They are the expression of a world where cosmic forces and ancient biology have been in conversation for long enough that the conversation has become constitutive. These dragons are not using glintstone. They have become glintstone, at least partially, their physical nature transformed by centuries of intimate contact with the material they work with. Royal Knight Loretta, found twice in the game, once guarding the entrance to the Halig Tree in the consecrated snowfield, and once in her spirit ash form, is a knight who devoted herself to the service of Miquella's project with the specific loyalty of someone who has found something worth serving that the conventional institutions of her world could not offer. She is a warrior of the Carian royal family's tradition, trained in a school of combat that combines physical skill with magical capability, and her presence at the Erdtree tells you something about Miquella that her other followers also demonstrate. He attracted people who'd been failed by the existing order, who needed something to believe in that was organised around principles the Golden Order had abandoned or never possessed. The Lands Between is full of things that have been forgotten, not lost in the sense of being destroyed or consumed, forgotten in the specific sense of being no longer attended to, of being present but outside the awareness of anyone who might do something about their situation. The Golden Order's maintenance of the world was never comprehensive. It favoured some things and neglected others, elevated some beings and discarded others, and the things it discarded and neglected have been surviving in the spaces between its attention ever since. The Forgotten Bosses are the most honest portrait available of what the Golden Order's civilization actually looked like from the perspective of the things it did not prioritise. Some of the bosses in Elden Ring are not central to any great story or cosmic conflict. They are simply things that have been left behind, abandoned in the corners of the world where the Golden Order's maintenance doesn't reach, persisting in states that were never intended to be permanent because the systems that were supposed to process them, or contain them, or simply end them, have stopped functioning. These are the Forgotten Ones, and they are in some ways the most honest portraits of what the Lands Between actually is, a world full of things that have outlasted their context. The Tibia Mariner is found in multiple locations across the Lands Between, a skeletal figure in a boat who commands an army of skeletal undead and summons an enormous ancient dragon turtle in some encounters. The visual is darkly comic, a skeleton in a boat, but the lore behind it is genuinely strange. The Tibia Mariner represents the boatman who ferries souls across to whatever afterlife exists in the Lands Between's cosmology, a being whose purpose is connected to the management of death, in a world where death has been made inconsistent by Marika's removal of the Rune of Death. The Tibia Mariner is still doing its job. It is still trying to manage the passage of souls. In a world where the mechanisms for that management have broken down, the effort looks like madness. It looks like a skeleton in a boat raising an army of the dead. The Deathbirds are beings associated with death's transformation across the cycle of night and day, enormous feathered creatures that only appear after dark and that carry in their nature the specific intersection between death and the turning of time. They are ancient in a way that predates the Erdtree's management of death, belonging to an order that existed before the Golden Order attempted to make death controllable. Their presence in the world, appearing only at night, is the world's reminder that the old order of death and time still persists underneath the Golden Order's architecture, coming out after dark when the Golden Order's light is at its weakest. The grafted scion that you fight at the very beginning of the game, that enormous creature made entirely of assembled arms and weapons that kills most players on their first encounter, is one of the most visually shocking of all the encounters, and one whose lore is deeply connected to Godrick's obsession. It is a product of grafting, of the same philosophy that produced the throne room of Stormvale Castle, the belief that assembling more parts produces something more powerful than the original components. The grafted scion is what happens when that philosophy is taken to its extreme conclusion, when the grafting is so complete that there is no original body underneath it anymore, just the assembled pieces functioning as a unified whole without any coherent identity underneath. The Fell Twins, those enormous humanoid bosses found in optional underground areas, are omens like Morgott and Mog. Their existence underground, in the same sewers and catacombs where omens are typically cast, tells you something about the fate of most omens. those who were not born demigods and therefore lacked any of the divine protection that even the despised Morgott and Mog possessed. The Fell Twins grew. Without the constraints of Leyndell's society, without the management that the Golden Order applied to the Omen demigods, they simply grew into what the Omen nature, given space and time and the absence of suppression, produces. They are enormous and hostile and deeply powerful. They are what Omens become when they are not managed into submission. The things that inspire genuine dread in the lands between are not always the things that are most powerful or most ancient. Sometimes the most disturbing encounters are the ones where the wrongness is specific and precise, where what you are fighting is wrong, in a way that you can almost identify and almost explain, but that resist the kind of categorization that would make it easier to process. The nightmare bosses of Elden Ring are wrong in this specific way, not simply dangerous, but profoundly, specifically, carefully wrong, in ways that the game constructs deliberately rather than produces as an accident of design. There is a category of boss in Elden Ring that defies the other categories, because what defines them is not their origin or their allegiance or their corruption, but the specific quality of wrongness that they embody. These are the nightmares, the encounters that produce a visceral response in players that goes beyond the fear of difficulty or the tension of combat. They are wrong in the way that some things are wrong, in a way that touches something deeper than rational assessment. Mog, Lord of Blood, whom we discussed as a demigod, also belongs here because what Mog has done with the Formless Mother's gifts makes him something that is beyond simply a demigod who chose a different patron. He has built a blood dynasty. He has kidnapped Miquella and is attempting to use the most powerful of the demigods as a vehicle for his own ascension. His arena, the Mogwyn Palace, is soaked in blood in a way that is not simply aesthetic. That is the expression of a theology of blood being enacted on a cosmic scale. The scarlet blood that covers everything in his realm is the Formless Mother's presence made physical. Her essence spread across every surface of the world her chosen champion has built in her name. The Knight's Cavalry are armoured riders who appear only at night and who are connected to a tradition of knightly service that predates the Golden Order. They are not villains in any conventional sense. They are defenders of the night, of the specific time that the Golden Order's light does not reach, of the hours when the old things come out and the world briefly returns to something older than the Erdtree's dominance. Fighting them at night, in the darkness they belong to, is meeting them on their own terms. The various Omen bosses found in the sewers beneath Leyndell and in other locations represent the accumulated rage of a people who have been systematically discarded. The Omen culture that exists in the underworld of the capital is not a simple gathering of monsters. It is a community of people who have been forced underground by a society that considers them abominations, who have built their own culture and their own hierarchy in the spaces that the Golden Order threw them into. Their hostility is not irrational aggression. It is the hostility of beings who have had everything that should have been theirs taken away, and who have been surviving in the sewers ever since. Margit the Fell Omen, who is Morgott in disguise, encounters you before you have the context to understand what you're actually fighting. He is the first major obstacle the game places in your path, the being who guards the approach to Stormveil Castle, and who fights with a severity that communicates immediately that this world is not going to be easy. His disguise as Margit is the game's first lie to the player, a misdirection that the game expects you to eventually see through. When you understand that Margit is Morgott, that the disguised gatecrasher is actually the devoted guardian of the throne, The entire encounter retroactively transforms into something more complicated than a boss fight. It is Morgott testing you, seeing if you are worthy of proceeding, doing his job in the only form available to him. The Shadow of the Erdtree DLC added a full set of new bosses in the Land of Shadow. The hidden realm connected to Miquella's Great Migration and the ancient history of the Golden Order, and each of them carries lore that enriches the main game's narrative while adding entirely new dimensions to the mythology. Messmer the Impaler is perhaps the most significant new character introduced in the DLC, a figure who was erased from official history in the same way that Gwyn's firstborn was erased from the records of the lands between. He is Marika's son, the red-haired child born with an affinity for serpentine flame that Marika could not accommodate within the Golden Order's framework. He was sent to the Land of Shadow to conduct a campaign of conquest, and was then forgotten, his name removed from the records, his existence denied. The Land of Shadow itself, that place of eternal twilight that exists alongside the lands between rather than in it, was the site of Messmer's endless war, a campaign that has been running so long that Messmer himself has become something more and less than what he was. He fights with a passion that is almost devotional, with a fire that is simultaneously beautiful and catastrophic, and his dialogue reveals a person who has been doing what he was told to do for so long that the doing has become his entire identity. He is loyal to Marika in the specific way of someone who has never been given reason to question that loyalty, who has been too busy fighting the war she sent him to fight to develop the perspective that might have allowed him to question it. His tragedy is the tragedy of someone who served completely and was erased anyway. Romina, Saint of the Bud, is a being of Scarlet Rot, who represents the Rot's capacity for transformation, and something that might, from a certain angle, be called growth. She is found in a space that connects the Land of Shadow's history to the Rot's ongoing expression in the world, and her presence there tells a story about the relationship between the Rot and the things that the Golden Order was trying to suppress in the Land of Shadow specifically. Baal the Dread is the most powerful of the ancient dragons encountered outside of Farum Azula, a being of such overwhelming draconic power that the veteran dragon slayer Egon has dedicated his existence to eventually killing him. The questline that surrounds Baal is one of the DLC's most emotionally engaging, built around Egon's obsessive pursuit of vengeance for something Baal did that consumed everything that mattered to Egon, and left him with nothing except the obsession itself. Fighting Baal with Egon's help, hearing Egon's increasingly frenzied encouragement as the battle reaches its most intense moments, is one of the most specifically human experiences the DLC offers. The experience of fighting alongside someone who has made killing a specific thing the entire content of their remaining life. Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame, is the DLC's most direct engagement with the Frenzied Flame mythology, a nobleman who came to the Land of Shadow seeking something and found the Three Fingers instead. His questline traces the dissolution of a person into the Flame's principle, the specific stages of losing oneself to the Frenzied Flame's call, and his boss fight represents the end of that process, the moment when what was a person becomes entirely an expression of the Flame. His transformation is not presented as simply horrifying, it is presented as something that was chosen at each stage by someone who had reasons for each choice, even as the choices collectively led somewhere they cannot return from. Scadutree Avatar is the guardian of the sacred Scadutree, the shadow tree that grows in the Land of Shadow as a counterpart to the Erdtree. Understanding it requires understanding what the Scadutree is, and why it exists in a hidden realm alongside the Golden Order's most sacred symbol. The Land of Shadow was where Marika came from, where her history before her ascension to godhood is located, and the Erdtree is connected to that history in ways that the DLC explores through its environmental storytelling and item descriptions. The Avatar is not simply a tree monster, it is a guardian of something that the official history of the Golden Order needed to be hidden. Commander Gaius, the boar-riding general found in the Land of Shadow, is one of the clearest portraits of the DLC of someone who chose the Golden Order's service fully and has been shaped entirely by that service. He's a military man, a commander, a person whose identity is built entirely around military hierarchy and the execution of orders. His presence in the Land of Shadow, fighting on behalf of Messmer's campaign, is the expression of a complete devotion that asks no questions about whether the campaign is just. There are bosses in Elden Ring that do not fit neatly into any single category, but that carry lore so specific and so carefully constructed that passing over them would leave the picture of the game's world incomplete. These are the encounters that exist at the intersections of the categories we've discussed. Bosses that are simultaneously ancient and corrupted, simultaneously servants and forgotten, simultaneously nightmares, and something that almost deserves to be called sympathetic. Mulg's Omen form, encountered before you reach the Blood Palace, is the expression of the Formless Mother's influence on a being who was already shaped by the specific kind of deprivation that being an Omen in Leyndell produces. The transformation that the Formless Mother offered Morg was not simply power, it was acceptance. The specific gift of being chosen by something, valued by something, incorporated into something's plan rather than discarded into its sewers. The Formless Mother chose Morg for reasons that the game does not fully explain, but the effect of that choosing on someone who had never been chosen by anything in the Golden Order's civilization is evident in everything about Morg's devotion. He is not simply a worshipper, he is someone who has finally been wanted. The Black Knife assassins found throughout the game in various locations are the women who carried out the Night of the Black Knives, the event that killed Godwyn and changed everything. They are Numen, members of the lineage closest to Marika's own lineage, women who were in some sense her servants, and who were subverted by Ranni into instruments of the most consequential assassination in the game's history. Encountering them throughout the world, in locations far from where the night occurred, is encountering the continuing story of people who did something irreversible and have been living with the consequences ever since. They do not speak. They fight with blades that still carry the rune of death's influence. They are what assassins look like after the deed is done, and the world has been changed, and there is nowhere to go except forward into a future that their action made. The Red Wolf of Radahn, found guarding the debate parlour in Raya Lucaria, is one of the game's more mysterious entities, a creature that embodies an aspect of Radagon's identity in the specific space of the Academy that was most connected to his intellectual legacy. It fights with the same sorcerous techniques that Radahn himself developed, carrying his red-tinged magic in a form that is simultaneously independent and completely derived. It is the idea of Radagon's sorcerous power given animal form, haunting the place where that power was most studied and most applied. Godskin. Noble and Godskin Apostle are members of a religious order that was dedicated to slaying gods and wearing their skin, and the existence of this order in the lands between raises questions that the game is content to leave unanswered. Who founded this order? What god authorized the killing of other gods? What was the theological framework that made wearing divine skin a form of devotion rather than simply desecration. The Godskin practitioners are found in locations throughout the game that connect them to the most esoteric edges of the Golden Order's religious tradition, and their black and white robes, their specific ceremonial garments, suggest an institution with its own internal discipline and its own sense of righteousness. They believed in what they were doing. The game does not tell you whether what they were doing was sanctioned, or heretical, or somewhere in between. Lich Dragon Fortisax, whom we discussed in the context of the Ancient Ones, also belongs here because his story is inseparable from Godwyn's story, and Godwyn's story is one of the most complete tragedies in the game. Godwyn was the best of the demigods by most accounts, genuinely kind and genuinely good in a world where goodness was rare among those born to power. He was killed in a way designed to produce maximum horror, his soul destroyed while his body persisted, and the result is the Prince of Death, that enormous writhing growth of flesh and wood and root that the Erdtree has incorporated into its deepest reaches. Fortisax stayed with him, through all of it, through the transformation and the corruption and whatever experience Godwyn's body, without his soul, is having in the roots of the Erdtree. He descended into the roots, and he has been fighting the Death Blight ever since, a battle that cannot be won because the Blight is not an enemy that can be defeated, but a condition that can only be managed. He is managing it, for Godwyn. Out of loyalty to a friendship that outlasted every condition that makes friendship make sense. The various Crucible Knight variants found throughout the game, the one with a tail aspect and the one with a wing aspect, are expressions of the different biological inheritances that the Crucible Age made available. Every Crucible Knight is the expression of a specific ancient biological possibility, a specific combination of human and other that the Crucible permitted, and that the Golden Order subsequently tried to categorize as aberration. The Tail Knight expresses one ancient lineage, the Wing Knight expresses another. Fighting them both in the Crucible Knight duo encounter is fighting two different faces of the same historical fact. The fact that humanity before the Golden Order was not the fixed category that the Golden Order's theology claims it has always been. Renala as a boss deserves a second mention in a different register, not as a grieving wife, but as a genuine scholar engaging in the only form of magic she has left. Her boss fight, the first phase where you disrupt the golden light that protects her by breaking the students who carry it, is genuinely strange and beautiful. She is doing magic. Real magic. The kind of magic that defined her before anything else defined her. And the second phase, that vast golden space where she summons the creations of her rebirthing art, is the expression of what her rune does at its fullest power. The ability to give anything a new beginning. She gives her creations new beginnings in the form of summoning them to defend her. She applies the only power she has left to the situation she finds herself in with a creativity that is genuinely admirable, even when you are on the receiving end of it. Astel, in its second encounter, at the end of Ranni's questline in the Lake of Rot passage, is a different entity from the first encounter, and yet functionally identical in form. The existence of two Astels raises the possibility that either multiple such creatures arrived on the world inside meteors, or that Astel has some means of replication or reproduction that defies ordinary biological categories. Either possibility is disturbing in different ways. Multiple Astels from outside the cosmos means there was more than one point of entry for this kind of alien life. Self-replicating Astel means the alien presence is already more established in the world than the single encounter would suggest. The game does not resolve this. It simply places two of them and trusts you to notice. The Erdtree avatar guardians found throughout the lands between minor Erdtrees are beings that emerge from the Erdtree's own presence in those locations, expressions of the Golden Order's divine power given ambulatory form. They are not beings that were separately created and assigned to guard the minor Erdtrees. They grew out of the trees themselves, out of the golden presence that the trees represent. This means that the Guardians are, in some sense, the Erdtree itself reaching out to defend itself. The divine presence taking a form capable of physical confrontation when physical confrontation becomes necessary. When you fight an Erdtree avatar, you are fighting the Erdtree's immune response. You are the infection being expelled. The Full Moon Queen, Renala's summons during her second phase include an enormous glintstone dragon, a troll, and other legendary creatures, all of them reborn through her great rune in forms that serve her defense. The dragon she summons is not a wild dragon she has captured or tamed. It is a dragon she has reborn, a creature that was once something, and that she has given a new beginning in this form, in this moment, for this purpose. The generosity of her rune being expressed as a combat tool is one of the game's more poignant ironies. She gives new beginnings. She's using that gift to fight for her continued existence, which is itself a kind of new beginning, a continuation she should not be able to maintain given how thoroughly she has lost herself. The lands between extends far below its surface, and the bosses found in its underground spaces are among the most lore-rich in the game precisely because the underground is where the Golden Order's influence is least complete, where older things persist, where the world before the Erdtree is most present. Valiant gargoyles found guarding the coffin that takes you to the deep-root depths are constructs of the Erdtree's divine infrastructure, massive stone beings animated by the Golden Order's power to serve as guardians of specific thresholds. They are among the more straightforwardly purposeful of the game's bosses, built to guard rather than having ended up guarding, through some sequence of tragic events. But the specific thing they guard, the passage to the deep-root depths, and through that to Godwyn's resting place, gives their guardianship a specific weight. They are standing between the ordinary world and the most disturbing consequence of the game's central event, the Night of the Black Knives and the death of Godwyn. The Golden Order built guardians to ensure that what happened in the roots of the Erdtree remained in the roots of the Erdtree. The Mimic Tear, encountered in Nokron, is the most philosophically provocative boss in the game, in terms of what it asks about identity and selfhood. The Mimic Tear is a silver tear, a blob of living mercury native to the eternal cities of the Nox, that has taken on your character's appearance, your weapons, your armour, your spells. It has become you, or the closest thing to you that a blob of living mercury can become, and it fights you as you. The encounter is, in the most literal sense, a fight against yourself, against a version of yourself that exists independently of you, that is doing what you do without being you, that has your form without your consciousness or your history or your reasons for doing what you do. Defeating the Mimic Tear is defeating something that looks exactly like you, and the game does not comment on this. It simply presents you with your reflection and asks you to fight it. Rykard's serpent god form, when the serpent he merged with is fully expressed rather than wearing his human face, is the complete expression of what Rykard became when he gave himself to the serpent entirely. The human voice that speaks through it, the vestige of Rykard's consciousness that persists in the merged form, gives the encounter a quality that a simple monster fight would not have. Something is still in there. Something still knows what it is doing and why it is doing it, and can articulate that in human language even from inside the massive body of an ancient god-devouring serpent. Raikard chose this. He is still choosing it. And the game lets him express that choice even in the boss fight where you're working to end it. The Stone Digger troll found in the Old Altus tunnel and the various troll enemies throughout the game belong to a tradition of giant humanoid beings that predates the Golden Order's specific social organisation. Trolls in Elden Ring are workers, specifically and primarily workers, beings whose size and strength made them valuable for heavy labour, and who are therefore found throughout the game in proximity to mining operations, construction sites, and the various heavy infrastructure that the Golden Order's civilization required. The violence they direct at you is not the violence of enemies or guardians or protectors of sacred things. It is the violence of beings that have been doing dangerous physical work for so long that anything entering their workspace triggers defensive aggression. They are the working class of the Lands Between's economy, exploited for their strength, left in their mining tunnels when the civilization that employed them stopped needing their work done. The Knight's Cavalry leader, the most powerful of the Knight's Cavalry encountered at a specific location after dark, represents the tradition of the old knightly orders that predate the Golden Order's reorganization of martial culture around the Erdtree's religious framework. The Knight's Cavalry maintain a tradition that the Golden Order has no use for, the tradition of the Knight as servant of the Knight itself, rather than as servant of any specific lord or institution. Their patrol routes cover the same paths night after night, have covered them since before the Shattering, and will continue covering them regardless of what happens in the political sphere above them. They are the most persistent of the game's many persistent things, still doing their rounds in a world that has largely stopped making rounds. Demi-human Queen Gillica and her variants, those small primitive humanoid leaders that command groups of the demi-human enemies found throughout the game, represent one of the many peoples of the Lands Between who exist entirely outside the Golden Order's framework of value and consideration. The demi-humans are not evil. They're simply people who belong to a different kind of civilization, a less organised and less architecturally impressive kind, and who are consequently treated by the Golden Order society as animals rather than as people. Their queens are genuinely their queens, commanding genuine loyalty from their communities, organising their lives around principles that are different from the Golden Order's, but no less real for the difference. Killing a demi-human queen is killing a leader. The game presents this without comment, trusting the player to notice what is actually happening. Miranda the Blighted. Bloom and her variants are beings of the Scarlet Rot that have taken on a plant-like form, enormous flowers of rot that combine biological lushness with cosmological corruption in a combination that is both beautiful and deeply wrong. They are the rot expressing itself through one of the forms that the Crucible Age's biological creativity made available, a form where the dissolution principle that the rot represents is expressed through something that looks superficially like growth rather than decay. The flower is blooming. The bloom is rot. The distinction between growth and dissolution that the Golden Order's clean binary of life and death requires is not maintained by the Scarlet Rot, which treats them as phases of the same process. The crucible of life fight in the crumbling Faera Mazula region, those ancient crucible entities that remain in the storm-locked ruins of a time before the current age, are among the oldest enemies you fight in the game. They are older than the Lands Between's current structure. They are older than the Erdtree. They are older than almost everything except the barest foundations of the world, and their presence in Faera Mazula, that space outside of time, suggests that they have been preserved there precisely because the normal processes of time that would have changed or ended them have not reached them. They are what the Crucible Age produced at its most powerful. Crucible energy, given a form capable of sustained existence and sustained action. Fighting them in the space outside time is fighting the past directly, meeting the age before the current one in its most intact and most powerful expression. The bell-bearing hunters that appear at night in merchant locations are the most unsettling of the game's nocturnal enemies because of what their appearance implies about the merchants themselves. These hunters appear specifically at the locations of wandering merchants, attacking anyone present, and carry bell bearings that allow you to purchase the merchant's wares from a particular NPC after they are defeated. The implication is disturbing, and the game does not soften it. The bell-bearing hunters arrive to end the merchants and take their inventories. Whether they are specifically targeting these merchants, or whether the merchants have some connection to the hunters that the game does not fully explain, the encounter produces a specific quality of unease that simple combat danger does not account for. Something is happening to the merchants. The bell-bearing hunters are part of it. The shadow of the Erdtree expanded not just the number of bosses, but the philosophical scope of the game's engagement with its central themes. Where the main game explored what happens when a divine order shatters, the DLC explores what the divine order was built on top of, what it cost to build it, and what persists in the hidden realm where the costs were paid. Divine Beast Dancing Lion is one of the DLC's most visually extraordinary encounters, a creature that is not simply an animal, but a sacred construct, something built rather than born, made to embody a specific principle of wild divine power that the Land of Shadows tradition maintained. It fights with the forces of storm and snow and thunder, with the specific elemental vocabulary of a world that organized its relationship with natural power differently than the Golden Order civilization. The Golden Order brought nature under the Erdtree's golden framework. The Land of Shadow maintained a relationship with nature that was more reciprocal and more wild, and the dancing lion is the expression of that relationship given a form capable of action. Meteor, Mother of Fingers, is perhaps the most disturbing revelation in the DLC because of what it implies about the two fingers and the entire infrastructure of the Greater Will's connection to the lands between. Meteor is the source of the fingers, the original from which all the two fingers and three fingers in the world derive. She is found broken in the Land of Shadow, damaged by something. Her connection to the Greater Will severed or compromised in a way that transforms her from a source of divine guidance into something that is barely holding together. The fingers scattered throughout the lands between came from this being. The divine communication that shaped the entire Golden Order originated here, and here she is, broken, in a hidden realm that the official history of the Golden Order pretends does not exist. Relena, Twin Moon Knight, is a character whose connection to Renala adds a dimension that the game delivers through environmental suggestion rather than explicit statement. She's found in Castle Ensis, wielding both golden and cold moon magic, representing a tradition of moon sorcery that parallels Renala's while existing in a completely different context. Whether she's a student, a contemporary, a relative, or something else entirely, is not definitively established. What the game establishes is that the moon sorcery tradition that Renala embodied had expressions in the Land of Shadow as well as in Raya Lucaria, that the specific school of magic connected to the full moon had a presence in the hidden history of the world that the official Academy tradition does not acknowledge. putrescent night is the guardian of the Cerulean coast, a space of particular beauty in the DLC that exists in proximity to the rot and to the specific quality of decay that the Land of Shadow expresses through its southern reaches. The night guards something that has already been affected by a process of dissolution, defending a beauty that is itself in the process of becoming something else. The armour it wears is encrusted with the evidence of that dissolution, partially consumed by the same process it has been appointed to guard against, and yet it continues. The putrescent night is one of the game's clearest images of devotion that persists past the point where the thing being protected can be fully protected, of guarding something that is already partly gone. Commander Gaius, riding his enormous boar through the Skadu view, is the most complete portrait of institutional loyalty in the DLC. A military man so thoroughly shaped by the chain of command that questioning the command has simply never been a cognitive option available to him. He fights with tactical precision and without hesitation, applying professional military competence to the specific problem of your presence in his patrol area. He does not hate you. He does not fear you. He simply identifies you as a problem within his operational remit and addresses you accordingly. The boar he rides, enormous and armoured and more threatening than most bosses in its own right, is the expression of the specific scale of military resource that the Land of Shadow's command structure had available. Everything about Gaius is institutional. Everything about him is in service. Romina, Saint of the Bud, blooms. This is her central visual characteristic and her central lore. Fact, the way that the rot she embodies expresses itself not as decay in the simple sense, but as growth of a particular kind, as the emergence of something new from the dissolution of something old. Her arena fills with rot blooms as the fight progresses, the space becoming more thoroughly an expression of her principle as she commits more fully to it. She is a saint in the specific sense that the tradition she represents uses the word, a being who has achieved a particular relationship with the cosmic force she serves, and who has been shaped by that relationship into something that expresses it completely. The rot is not something she has, it is something she is, and the bloom is what complete identification with a cosmic principle looks like from the outside. Scatutry Avatar, the great guardian of the Shadow Tree, is connected to everything in the DLC through the specific thing it protects. The Scatutry is the shadow counterpart to the Erdtree, growing in a realm that exists alongside the Golden Order's central symbol, rather than in the same space, its existence a secret that the Golden Order's official history chose not to acknowledge. The Avatar's protection of the tree is not simply the protection of a powerful being guarding an important location. It is the expression of a relationship between a guardian and a sacred object that predates the current age. That was established in the time before the Erdtree dominated everything, when the Shadow Tree and its world were simply the world rather than the hidden counterpart to something more powerful. The most consistent thing across every boss in Elden Ring is that none of them are simply monsters. Every single one of them, from Godrick at his most pathetic to the Elden Beast at its most cosmic, has a story that explains why they are what they are and why they are where you find them. The game never asks you to fight something that does not make sense. It asks you to fight beings whose stories you may not know yet, and to do the work of learning those stories so that the fights become something more than obstacle and resolution. Every fog gate in Elden Ring is a gate to a story, and the story always rewards the entering. What is also consistent is that nearly every boss was doing something before you arrived. Radahn was holding the stars, Renala was singing to her amber, Fortisax was fighting the death blight in the roots. The fire giant was chained to his forge. Placidusax was waiting. They were not waiting for you specifically. They were engaged in their own ongoing existence, an existence that your arrival interrupts and that your victory ends. This is one of the most important things to understand about Elden Ring's design philosophy. The bosses are not designed, they are discovered. They exist in the world and you encounter them, and the encounter changes both of you, even if the change to the boss is terminal. The sheer variety of what Elden Ring uses as the basis for its boss encounters is worth appreciating specifically. A woman's grief, a man's inadequacy, a general's rot-destroyed mind, a god's lore expressed as a leviathan, a dragon's vigil for a lost friend, an ancient civilization's last guardian, a knight's devotion to an institution that despises him, a scholar's rebirth power turned towards self-defense, an alien life form from outside the cosmos, a former saint who started eating gods. This range, this comprehensive survey of the different forms that power and tragedy and strangeness can take, in a world as carefully built as the lands between, is what makes Elden Ring's encounter design more than simply impressive. It makes it a genuine achievement of world building, the proof that a game world has been thought about deeply enough that every room in it can contain something that matters. The bosses you fight in Elden Ring are not obstacles in the conventional sense, they are arguments. Each one is the game making a specific argument about what power costs, what devotion produces, what transformation looks like when it goes wrong, what remains when everything else has been stripped away. Godrick argues that borrowed power is still power, but it is also still borrowed. Renala argues that grief is its own kind of kingdom. Radahn argues that a person can outlast everything that made them who they were. Morgott argues that you can love something that hates you, and that love can sustain you indefinitely even if it cannot save you. Malenia argues that containing a god is its own form of power, and that releasing it is not defeat but honesty. These arguments accumulate over the course of the game into something that is not a thesis in any simple sense, but that functions like one. Elden Ring, through its bosses, is arguing that every powerful thing you encounter has a reason for being powerful, and that reason is usually a story, and the story usually involves loss. Power, in Elden Ring's world, is almost never simply given. It is usually what remains after something has been taken, or what was built to compensate for something that was lacking, or what was acquired in the process of surviving something that should not have been survived. The lands between is a world where power is the scar tissue of trauma, and the bosses are the most concentrated expression of that fact. Taking the time to understand each boss, to learn their story before or after or alongside fighting them, is not simply optional enrichment for players who enjoy lore. It is the full experience that the game was designed to offer. Elden Ring can be played as a series of increasingly difficult combat encounters. It can also be played as a complete world, populated by beings with histories and motivations and specific forms of suffering that make every encounter mean something. Both are valid, but only one of them is what the game was built for. That is the complete picture of every boss in Elden Ring. Not every mechanical detail, not every attack pattern or damage threshold, every story, every reason, every person who was someone before they were a boss, and every something that was something before it was an obstacle. They deserve to be understood, and now you understand them. We have been through every category of boss in Elden Ring tonight. From the demigods who inherited a broken world to the ancient things that predate the current order, from the servants who gave everything to the Golden Order, to the corrupted and the forgotten and the nightmares that the world produced when its systems stopped functioning properly. And having been through all of them, it is worth stepping back and asking what the collection of these encounters actually says, what Elden Ring is telling you through the specific set of bosses it chose to put in your path. The most consistent thing across every boss in Elden Ring is that none of them are simply monsters. Every single one of them, from Godrick at his most pathetic to the Elden Beast at its most cosmic, has a story that explains why they are what they are and why they are where you find them. The game never asks you to fight something that does not make sense. It asks you to fight beings whose stories you may not know yet, and to do the work of learning those stories so that the fights become something more than obstacle and resolution. Every fog gate in Elden Ring is a gate to a story, and the story always rewards the entering. The range of those stories is one of the most remarkable things about the game's design. From the intimate human tragedy of Godrick's inadequacy to the cosmic scale of the Elden Beast's function, from the personal loss of Renala's grief to the civilizational loss of Placidusax's endless waiting, the game covers every possible scale and register of tragedy, and does not treat any of them as more important than the others. Godrick's pathetic desperation matters as much as Maliketh's cosmic servitude. The Tibia Mariner's forgotten purpose matters as much as Radahn's heroic fall. Every story is treated as worthy of attention. This is ultimately what Elden Ring is about. Not the Elden Ring itself, not the Golden Order or the Greater Will or any of the specific institutions and cosmic forces that the narrative involves. It is about paying attention to every story, including the ones that seem small, including the ones that belong to beings you are required to kill to progress. It is about the specific value of knowing why something is what it is before you end it. About the difference between fighting something you understand and fighting something you simply need to defeat. Before we close tonight, I want to take a moment to thank you for being here through all of this. We have been through every major boss in Elden Ring, one by one, and if you made it this far, you understand this world differently than you did when we started. If this meant something to you, please subscribe to Nightfall Lore and leave a comment below. Tell me where in the world you're listening from. Tell me which boss story surprised you most. Tell me which one you will never see the same way again. Every comment, every subscription is what makes these long, careful videos possible. The Elden Ring is called the Elden Ring because it is the fundamental law of the world made into a ring, the principle that organizes existence given a shape. Every boss in the game exists in relationship to that ring, to the law it represents, to the breaking of it and the scattering of its pieces and the wars that follow the scattering. Godrick is what the scattering produced in someone too weak to compete for the largest pieces. Renala is what the scattering produced in someone whose connection to the ring was given rather than inherited. Radahn is what the scattering produced in someone strong enough to fight for his piece, but too damaged to do anything with it. Morgott is what the scattering produced in someone who never had a piece to begin with but devoted himself to the memory of the whole. Malenia is what the scattering produced in someone whose piece was always inside her, inseparable from her suffering, impossible to remove without removing her. Each boss is an answer to the question of what the Elden Ring's breaking made of the people and beings who were present for it. And the answers are as various as the people and beings themselves, ranging from the pathetic to the magnificent, from the intimate to the cosmic, from the deeply personal to the entirely abstract. The breaking of the ring was a single event, What it produced was a world of stories, each one the specific response of a specific being to a specific relationship with the thing that was broken. Understanding all of those stories is understanding the lands between completely, not understanding its geography or its systems or its mechanics, understanding what it is actually about, what it has been about from the moment the first demigod picked up a great rune and decided that what they had in their hands was worth fighting for, and what it is still about in every fog gate, in every arena, in every encounter that asks you to be present with something before you end it. The lands between asked you to understand it. You did. That is the whole thing. The fog gate is one of the most distinctive symbols in all of gaming, that wall of white mist that appears across a doorway and signals that something significant lies beyond. Something that will test you. Something that will probably kill you at least once. Something that requires you to commit to the encounter by passing through rather than simply approaching and retreating. But what the fog gate actually is, in the lore of Elden Ring, is a threshold of attention. On one side is the ordinary world with all its complexity and all its noise. On the other side is a story that the game has been saving for this moment, a being or a creature or a force that exists in its own specific suffering or its own specific purpose, and that you are about to encounter directly. The fog gate separates looking at a world from being in it. It separates reading about tragedy from standing in front of it. Every time you pass through a fog gate in Elden Ring, you are making a commitment. Not just to fight something, to be present with something, to encounter it fully and honestly, and to see it for what it is rather than simply for what it threatens to do to you. The game always rewarded that commitment, not necessarily with easy victories, but with the specific satisfaction of having understood something, of having stood in front of Godrick's desperation, and Renala's grief, and Radahn's ruined greatness, and Morgott's impossible loyalty, and Malenia's contained god, and Placidusax's eternal vigil, and said, "I see you. I understand why you are what you are. I am sorry for what it took to make you this." The Lands Between is full of these encounters, full of beings who are carrying something that they were not designed to carry, or who are doing something that was always going to end this way, or who are waiting for something that is never coming, or who are expressing something that they never chose to express. They are all there. They will all be there when you return. And knowing their stories changes every encounter, from combat to conversation, from obstacle to understanding, from something you survived to something you genuinely experienced. That is the complete collection of every boss in Elden Ring. Every one of them explained, every one of them seen. There is one final thing worth saying about the experience of fighting these bosses, now that you know their stories. The next time you load into Elden Ring and approach a fog gate, you will carry something you did not have before. The knowledge of what is waiting on the other side. Not what it does, but who it is. And that knowledge will not make the fight easier in a mechanical sense, but it will make it different. It will make the violence of the encounter feel like what it actually is. Not obstacle and resolution, but conversation and conclusion. The specific exchange between your presence and theirs that the game has been building towards since the moment you stepped onto the beach in Limgrave and the grace pointed you forward. Every fog gate you walk through now is a meeting. Every boss you face now is a person, or a being, or a force that you understand. And fighting something you understand is a completely different experience from fighting something you simply need to defeat. The Lands Between becomes, with this understanding, a world of meetings other than a world of obstacles. A world where even the most catastrophically difficult encounter is also the most complete expression of what this world is and what it has been trying to tell you. That is what knowing the story does. That is what all of this has been for. Every story in the lands between was worth knowing. Every boss was someone before they were a boss, and now you know who they were. That is everything. That is the whole gift that understanding a world like this can give you. Not victory, not the ending, the knowing, the specific, complete, hard-won knowing of a world that asked to be understood and that you understood. The shattering gave every demigod a great rune. It gave every ancient thing a reason to persist. It gave every corrupted being the specific form of corruption they carry. It gave every forgotten thing its specific quality of forgetting. It gave every nightmare its specific character of wrongness. And it gave you, the Tarnished, a reason to come back to a world that had declared you expendable. It gave you a purpose that none of the beings already in the lands between could fill. The purpose of someone who has nothing left to lose, and therefore nothing to protect except the truth of what they find when they go looking. What you found tonight in all of these encounters is the truth of the lands between. Not the official truth that the Golden Order would like you to believe, not the narrative of divine order and blessed grace and the righteous superiority of those the Erdtree favours. The actual truth. The truth of what power costs, what devotion produces, what transformation looks like when it happens to real beings with real histories in a real world. The truth that every boss in Elden Ring has been waiting to tell you, if you were patient enough to listen. You were patient enough. Rest now. The fog gates of the lands between will still be there when you wake. The bosses will still be waiting in their specific ruins and their specific grief and their specific purpose. And now you know who they are. Sleep well, good Tarnished. May the Golden Order, whatever remains of it, treat you gently